Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and today's episode is all about the soil survey and soil science, all regarding the USDA's collection of that kind of information. And today we have a very special guest, a now 7-year retired former employee for the USDA, Kerry Arroues. He's going to tell you a little bit about himself first of all.
Well, as Brandon said, this is Kerry Arroues. I did almost a 40-year career as a USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service employee. What used to be called the Soil Conservation Service. It was an agency set up after the Dust Bowl era to combat erosion. And I was specifically most of my time working on soil surveys so that people would have a good idea of what they're building on, what they're growing on, and those kind of things. So, but I have remained active too in my 7 years. I've actually done some backpacking and sampling up in the Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. I'm on the technical advisory group for one of the Kings River responses to the new Groundwater Sustainability Act. And I do actually volunteer at my old workplace, which is good because I can pass off some of the knowledge that I've gained in the field and from other people. And we co-organized the 2016 conference on the Tulare Lake, which was archaeology and geology and stratigraphy and all those things too. So but also one of the big things was in the past I had such great mentors, people like Dr. Gordon Huntington, who wrote the soil survey of the eastern Fresno area, all around Fresno area. He started the year I was born in 1951. And so Dr. Roy Schliemann, I mean, these people, they're on a big pedestal to me. And so for me, it's a way for me to pass on some of the knowledge that I'd gained, not just from them. Kim Chang, Terry Cook, I mean, it's been fun because I do enjoy interacting with people.
Awesome. So in your long span of working for the USDA and doing the soil survey, and even after your retirement, still working in this industry, what major changes have you seen since the beginning of your career?
Yeah. It's well, when I first started, I was under a really excellent trainer down in Bakersfield for a year, Con Kim Chang, who had been trained by Dr. Gordon Huntington, who went clear back. Some of the people that signed his thesis were even Dr. Hans Yaney, who wrote the book about factors of soil formation, those kind of things. So there's a legacy and there's a lineage of soil scientists that we all know is important to us. And so, well, one of the things, of course, obviously, and I think we could go into this at length, but is just the changes to more permanent crops now, the higher values. I believe firmly that agriculture is a critical part of everything in our valley. And at the same time, if you just took Fresno County, Tulare County, Kern, and little old Kings over here where I'm from, it's about $24 billion plus of agricultural production every year, and that's almost hard to envision because it wasn't that. It was way lower. Now the dollars were worth more back when I started because I started full time in 1975. So that's probably one of the biggest I've seen. Areas that weren't even irrigated.
Wow.
And so the amount of irrigation water required now is astronomically larger than it was back in 1975 when I started.
So going off of that point, you talk about the major changes being the increase in crop value, the change in I'm assuming the land value as well, and the changes in water and just access to it. With the new legislation in place, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and that sort of thing, all the new changes going on with the water situation, do you see the changes that you've seen in the past getting even larger, or do you see them? What direction do you see that going?
Well, we have the production. But despite that production, I see agriculture is under huge duress right now. And there's no doubt, socially, economically, everything, there's stresses on it. And even family-wise, because I was talking to someone this morning, he has a family farm, and of his 15 people his age, early 30s, only 3 were going to carry on the tradition in the family, which all that means is that farms will get larger and larger and larger, economy of scale type things. So that's definitely one. And then of course there's the consequences of the production of food, and it's you don't get anything for free, no matter what you hear in this political climate. There is nothing free. There is a cost, and to get water to the farmers. We can go into some of the specifics of some of the ecological things that have taken place, but socially, I think we're bound to head down a road that will change things.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. What do you think is because of your aspect of the industry not being what most consumers would think of when they think of agriculture, what do you think is the most important aspect? If you were to inform a consumer about what you do, what do you think is the most important part that you would want them to take away from your career?
Well, one thing is to me, the soil, and this is my quote because I've heard other people say things like it, but soil is the glue that holds the other disciplines together. So it holds your family together. If you're a farmer, it's basically what you're going to farm. If it has issues like a high salt level, or has a high water table, or you've got a hard pan, like a lot of places in the valley along this eastern front, then you're going to be addressing those issues, and the amount of inputs into your soil. For example, a slip plow going to 5 feet is going to make a significant amount of input of your money up front. And that's one of the big changes I have seen too was with this huge influx of hundreds of thousands of acres of permanent crops that were not there when I started, even in the 80s even. But when that took place, it did change. One thing they did, they figured out they had to change the fine stratification and other things in the soil, and that would make a huge difference in where the water went and where the salts went. So it made the difference between being able. I see areas that are farmed now by friends of mine that are farmers that I would not have thought I would ever see.
Wow, that's pretty interesting to see that kind of change occur in your lifetime. It's something that I think that I'm, as a new generation of agriculturalists, I think that's something that we're going to be expecting a lot of is these types of changes, being even more drastic than they already are.
And we have a soil taxonomy, just like plants have a genus and species.
Right.
Soils do too. When I first started, the seventh approximation came out, which was basically a way for us to key out soils. So that if I'm in Russia, or I worked in South America at one time in Uruguay for about a month of sampling soils, I can still classify these soils so that I can then portray what I'm seeing to somebody else by the classification of those soils. Well, what do you do about a soil that, for example, like the San Joaquin soil or the Exeter soil that has a hard pan with a clay increase over the top of it? What do you do when it's been deep ripped to 5 feet and it had mounds that were as high as this room, and it no longer has that? It's been leveled. Then you push 3 feet of water through it in an area that only got maybe 8 or 9 inches of precipitation previously. That's not the same soil.
Right.
How do you classify those? And so those are issues that have come up, and it's not just to classify. That's all well and good. What it's really about is telling the user of that soil, not just the farmer, but a realtor or somebody else, what it is going to be, what it can be used for or might be used for, but also what kind of problems they're going to encounter and how to overcome those problems. So the soil is absolutely critical. It's what holds the water. It's what you're going to be working with.
Yeah, no, definitely. So when this past couple weeks ago, we had the World Egg Expo obviously occur, and this year and last year I had the opportunity to interview a company called Fieldin. I'm not sure if you're familiar. In their company focuses on monitorization technology, so monitoring inputs of crops in terms of like what they input into the soil, what they get out of it, the tracking of the actual employees working on the soil, all the different like the chemical inputs, everything that goes into the soil, or even just in the entire operation, what goes in and out of it. So that kind of leads me to the question of what new technologies have we seen in the research field with your department? What have you seen that has greatly increased our ability to record this kind of information?
Well, when I first started, as a matter of course, because of being in this part of the valley, we would take soil samples, not every day, but while we were doing our soil auger, which generally we would go to 5 or 6 feet, and we'd use a shovel, and we had a backhoe, and we could open it up and look at more things. But generally, we would be looking at salinity. So you're looking at the electrical conductivity, the sodium adsorption ratio, the particle size analysis. Do you have any coarse sands in there? What's your sand, silt, and clay? How much water is that going to hold? Salts reduce that amount, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And so but that's what we did then. And maybe carbon. We would do organic carbon in those days. Nowadays they do a total carbon. And so now we do way more laboratory analysis, usually through our National Soil Survey Lab. When I was working in Lincoln, it's called the Kellogg Soil Survey Lab now, National Soil Survey Lab. And so there's a whole host of things we can check, that beyond what we used to in the past, even though we had good analysis, and even in the 80s when Kesterson reared its head and the high selenium started shutting down agriculture on the west side because of the drainage issues, I think I ran about 250 samples for selenium back in those days.
Wow.
Through our national lab, and they had to learn how to actually test for that because they didn't know. I mean, they were only plus or minus maybe 15%, but it still told you that you had an issue here because there were some deformities and things that they were finding in some of the wildlife populations. And and where did it come from? It came from a certain type of Cretaceous geology that was light density diatomaceous rock, and it floated down in our streams like Panoche Creek and Cantua Creek and ended up in our soils in the valley. And so these kind of things, and then of course, if you want to get really with GPS, it changed everything. Ground penetrating radar, all this kind of, we've used that in the Delta, California Delta. It's almost unlimited, and a lot of it is spot on location. I mean, there was none of that. I mean, I grew up on a stereoscope. Well, I don't know if you've looked at through a stereoscope, but I've looked for months on end through stereoscopes with aerial photos, and you can see 3D, and you can see a lot of things that you wouldn't. Now you've got Google Earth.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. No, that's incredible.
And old aerial photos, sometimes that weren't real clear either.
Right.
If you go back. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I mean, even from that perspective, even drone technology would be
amazing.
Largely beneficial for that. So I want to kind of cover a point that you kind of touched on in that answer. You talked about how we've been able to analyze the Central Valley soil more effectively than we ever have before.
Yeah.
I think that it's pretty well known, at least across the agricultural community. I'm not sure about consumer community as well, but California has the most fertile soil of anywhere almost in the entire world. That being said, have you had much experience with monitoring soil in other states, territories, other areas that we also farm in, and kind of compared the difference to kind of see what the true difference of how great California soil is?
Well, let's just take our San Joaquin Valley here. We could take the whole Central Valley. Let's just take from, say, San Joaquin County this way to the Grapevine.
Okay.
The Central Valley, let's say, this part of the Central Valley. Definitely the most productive place on earth. It's not even close. We've been blessed, incredibly so, with the Sierra Nevada to the east in this very, very deep trough of soils that we're able to grow just about anything but with water. And people, before I forget this too, people tend to discount even in the Sierra the importance of that, but we know the snow provides normally maybe 30% of our water supply, but way more important are those soils up there. They're not shallow like people think. It's not like when you're looking in Yosemite and you see those granite domes. Most of the soils are many, many, many meters deep up in the Sierra. That's holding water.
Wow.
So when it rains and when those soils, when the snow melts, it goes down into the soil. And so even last year's incredible water year that we had, those soils are still producing that. and it's coming down here. And so, yes, our soils are fertile. You might make a case for having more fertile soils in the Midwest. You could make a case for it, but they don't have. And the other thing too is the value of a Mediterranean climate. It's a feast or famine, and in my point has always been. Since it's feast or famine, and we're in a famine right now this particular year, we had rain in a very short window, and that's been it. Then you've got to be a very good steward of all the precip that falls, not only in the mountains, what you capture in dams, but also what you capture underground, and how efficiently you use it down here. So yeah, and I've seen the plains of Uruguay down there by Argentina and Brazil, and they incredible production, but they don't irrigate. They get 40 inches of rain, and that kind of thing. So a lot of it is related to, without water, you're going to have a hard time growing anything.
Right.
and we really don't have much here. So it's gradually. And people need water too. So the urban areas and we're paving over paradise.
Yeah,
is the way I put it.
Yeah,
it's the way I see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's unfortunate to see we're losing potentially the greatest tool we've ever had for the task we're going to have over the next the rest of humanity, feeding the world. It's our absolute greatest resource for that is being depleted because we're just not getting the resources we need to there for one reason or another. One of the things I wanted to ask about in that particular subject, and you actually brought this up before we even started the interview, was you're working on a new project having to do with Central Valley soil, right? Would you mind, as much as you can, kind of touch on that a little bit?
Well, part of the thing is in the Central Valley is everything's been changed. There's Thomas Wolfe wrote the famous phrase was, "You can't go home again." I had my 50th high school reunion last year up in Susanville, and so I went to Lassen Junior College up there, and you go home and everything's a scale model of what you remember. And so if you think there's some utopia out there, forget it. It's not. It's not here on Earth anyway. And so I think you need to think about. Everyone should be thinking about how can we keep this place that we've got and the social structure that we have at in good condition the best way that we can. And so I think first thing is good knowledge about what's there. What have we done? What needs to be fixed? That kind of thing. So one definitely way would be to look at the changes that have taken place in those soils, even if they're classified something differently from the past, and how can we use that to help people utilize those soils in their production later on.
I see. Interesting. So do you think that with, kind of our current, not to get too political, but kind of our current political climate with the issues with, regulation, with water control, with water rights, and with, really a consumer population that has very little to any kind of understanding of what it is we're doing behind the scenes, do you see a whole lot of hope for kind of getting to the things that we're working towards right now, like what we're talking about right now?
I think the technology is one hopeful place, but technology is also a double-edged sword too. For example, just a quick, the hundreds of thousands of acres that we now have of permanent crops that we didn't have in the 80s. Each of those are going to require up to, let's just say, 3 feet of water. That's a lot of water.
Yeah.
If you had 500,000 acres of it, that means you needed to have you need to have 1.5 pine flats just to handle the extra that you put out there.
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
So but on the same thing too, drip irrigation and the very carefully applied water, that sounds all good, and it is. The problem is you're applying salts every time you put water on. And they used to have something that was called leaching fraction or leaching requirement. It was preached to me back in the 70s. You've got to have more water than what your plant and evaporation requires, the evapotranspiration rate. And so you need to put on more water, and you have to have it open, in other words, slip plowed or some change, so that gypsum or whatever's required to be able to push those salts down past your root zone. Well, they're not doing that. You've got a little zone around your base of your trees, and it's getting saltier and saltier as it wicks out to those edges. And so down the middle of the row, it's going to be much saltier than it is right where you're applying the water, because the water is pushing it down at that spot, but it's also it's like a big cereal bowl of Cheerios with the milk. The edge has a little ring around it.
Right.
And so that doesn't sound like a big deal. It is a big deal. Civilizations have perished from this. Mesopotamia.
Wow.
There are civilizations that, because of salts and because of lack of drainage, they have died. And some people don't seem to care. I mean, I think sometimes when you're in the middle of an incredible bounty like we have here, you tend to discount it, and you don't think in terms of the fact that we are so blessed that we don't even understand it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you have a pretty good point there. What interactions have you had with farmers about these types of topics, where you had to convince a farmer that they need to prioritize their soil health, or like you were saying, like watch out for that potential ring of death, or kind of have an awareness of what it is they're putting into their crop production?
Well, some farmers are more proactive than others. That's just the way we all are. We're all hardwired, kind of the way that we. And for example, right now, take Jeff Mitchell. He's at the UC experiment station out in Five Points, and he's strongly a proponent of the no-till. And so many farmers would think that you have to till it every year. I'm going to get weeds, and you're going to have issues. And then when I'm trying to plant, I'm getting all these weeds stuck in my planter and all this stuff. And I saw it. We planted 9 acres in front of my church the other day, and that's what I saw. And so but all that aside, there are farmers such as, say, out on the west side, I've known some very proactive farmers are willing to try anything in order to not have to retire their land because the salts have taken over, because the drainage has taken over, because they can't get rid of the drainage water, that kind of thing. And so, and I've seen them try just about anything, including harvesting the soil from those salts and then using those in different kinds of products.
Oh, interesting.
So
that you kind of raised an interesting point with the no-till method. I've actually talked to a few farmers around this area that are starting to try more of those like regenerative ag methods to try to see if it can maximize their production or at least minimize their potential costs, not just financial but production costs as well. Has any of the research that you guys have done shown that these methods are worth trying, or that they potentially could be effective for a more productive?
Well, I was on a panel related to the last long drought that we had at the Soil Science Society of America meetings, and it was in Long Beach, and the Jeff Mitchell spoke at that. The same. It was actually I forget what they call it, but basically it was about the drought, that current drought. And because every time you till, what happens to some of that moisture? It goes in the air.
Yeah.
Every time you till, what happens to some of that carbon? It goes up in the air. And so I think there's logic to it. But I have been on the other side. I have a garden myself. I produce a few tons of produce for my church, and so and I put it out there, and I have the bags ready for people, and we've got 20 different kinds of tomatoes, and we've got peppers, and we've got all kinds of stuff. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't for my wife, but so I understand the complexities of things, and but if you want to do it in a sustainable fashion, which I would say most of us do, if you want to pass it on to the next generation in just as good a shape, then we need to be able to do that. And right now, this year right now, I saw how many wells are being pumped. It's pumping water, massive amounts of water out of the ground right now, because there's not going to be, these rivers are not going to run much through the canals this year. And so, and even this Frank Kern Canal, they've lost, I know it's more than half the capacity, and you're only, it's like your weakest link thing, because of the subsidence from groundwater pumping. You've lost that section of its capacity, which means that you've lost it for the whole thing.
Right.
And so you're only as good as your weakest link, and that has to be fixed.
Yeah.
And yes, it is farming that causes it, but it's also cities. But cities are small compared to the amount of water that are being put on because we have so much agriculture here. So, and there are different kinds of subsidence. If you go out by Cam Avenue and you're driving I-5 and you start bouncing up and down, what you're bouncing up and down on is shallow subsidence that basically has irregularly across the landscape fallen out. I mean, you can't level it. It's
interesting. I mean, that's a little intimidating for the optimists that are trying to say, like, yeah, we're gonna fix it. There's the chance it might not be as easy as everyone tries to make it sound like. But I think that one of the things that is kind of, the word for it is escaping me right now, but basically, like, I see a lot of farmers that are going opposite directions in that topic. There's some that are optimistic that we can save it, that we can bring California back to how it should be and how it could be most prosperous. And there's some farmers that are saying, California's doomed, we're moving somewhere else. Do you think that having that exodus of farmers to other states because California is losing its ground as not just ground physically, but ground metaphorically, we're kind of losing our strength in the state because of legislation and politics or whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts on the exodus, I guess is my question.
Yes, and I do know. I do know farmers that, and the human side of us all would be, let me take care of my family. I mean, that's family first. You want to make sure economically they're taken care of, and that's one of the primary reasons the huge influx of permanent crops, because you will make enough money, at least up till now, with those crops. The problem being, there is not enough water right now as currently legislated and or falls on our great land here up in the Sierra to handle that much. So there's only one option right now, and that has been to pump groundwater. And now there are ways to recharge, and there's a lot of other things that can be done, and I'm all for that. But the numbers are staggering, and it can be depressing. And so recognizing that, then you have to try innovative and really try something that's different. For example, if you just have something stored in our valley floor, you're going to lose 6 or 7 feet just to evaporation. If it went to its old, that's the imprint of the old Tulare Lake, 450,000 acres in size. That water wants to go there. The Kings River, the Kauai River, all of your small creeks coming out of this area here in Tulare County. The Kern River, it would come off the backside of Mount Whitney, come down the mountains, hit the Kern Lake, hit Buena Vista Lake, come through the Goose Lake area, and then eventually hit Tulare Lake, Summit Lake, and then in real high water years, wander out towards the Delta through the Fresno Slough to the San Joaquin River. And so those days are gone, but there is a natural flow of things, and I think it needs to be handled in spreading basins or something else, so that and I think the people that do the best job handling their water, because the technology for growing the crops is going great, but they do the best for handling their water under the new legislation too, because it's going to be required anyway. So so I think those people would be the people that'll be around, and the rest will be in another state.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a most accurate perspective on that issue that I've heard, at least. So kind of, I think probably one of the last questions I have for you, at least, and this is kind of a two-part question, is about our education about this particular issue about soil science and soil surveys as a whole.
Yes.
You mentioned how or before the interview, you mentioned how you did at least some time, lecturing and mentoring other people for this particular career.
Yes.
Do you think that our education system for this career is adequate? Do you think we're getting enough information about a need for help in the research department about the agri-science aspect of agriculture?
I think it's good. It's getting it, and it is better in some institutions, and maybe less so in others. There's sort of a wave. I went to Chico State, graduated in '73, and at that time they had a pretty good soils program, even though I graduated in agriculture with an agronomy option and just specialized in soils. So, but most of the people that I supervised through the years were at Cal Poly, soil scientists, and then I've strongly associated through the years with Fresno State, just because Fresno's here, and then some wonderful people as well, and so it's a people thing as well. So I think, but there's always better ways to do it, and I think there has to be a living to be made. So so whatever they do, you have to have them going towards a career that will make a difference in their lives, but a difference for society too. So I think that's another one of those important points. It is, education's critical. There's no doubt. The public, if they can go in and buy eggs for whatever they're buying them for now, cheap, they're happy.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think the second part of that question is also about education, but kind of in a different perspective. So one of the leading causes of the reason we have, a lot of the legislation we do, a lot of the purchasing choices that consumers make, a lot of the kind of just public opinion about certain things that's going on in the agricultural realm is just because consumers are kind of disconnected from the ag industry. A lot of them don't even know that there is a science aspect to agriculture. Right. Do you think that our current relationship with consumers is something that could be improved? Is there anything that you would, personally like to see more improvement in the communication with consumers about these types of topics? What would you, if you could talk to consumers, what would you want to tell them about?
Well, one thing, a lot more is online now. The Web Soil Survey, which is anybody that the entire state is now mapped, and there's been several of them that have had mapping. A reconnaissance survey back in 1915 or whatever. There was a group of surveys done in the 1930s, and then even now trying to address some of these changes that have taken place. So Web Soil Surveys there, and also all the books. I found out that I had a little gift in being able to put a lot of different things together, and so I wrote books about Western Fresno. Everything that I learned, I tried to make sure I got into those books, and they're online too. They're called Archive Soil Surveys. And so Kings County, the one right next door to us here, I wrote that on a manual typewriter. I typed every one. It didn't even plug in.
Wow.
And then Western Tulare that we're in here. Southwest Kern was another book that was written, and Northeast Kern was another one that I had a big part in, and Yosemite as well, Yosemite National Park. So these were all ones that I was able to touch. And what I'm trying to do, and what other soil scientists were trying to do, is say, here's what I've learned. It's important. Here's the data. Here's all the lab data. You can go here to find it. You can see it. And here's what we believe is important.
Okay. Well, and the reason I have to ask that question is because, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is a podcast dedicated to ag literacy, teaching consumers about different parts of the ag industry that they tend to not get much exposure to, and having a unique perspective from someone involved in a non-production side of agriculture necessarily is something that I think a lot of consumers need to hear from.
Well, there's one called it's Soils for Teachers, with a 4 in the middle, .org, and that's a book that I wrote about the San Joaquin soil, our official state soil of California.
Interesting.
And so and it's a nice story, and and you can. It tells you about how some children were able to push that to our legislature, which was amazing, and their teacher, and those kind of things. But it also can be used with the soil formation factors that we really didn't talk about much, like time, climate, those kind of things, parent material. Where did it come from? What kind of rock did it come from? And even. Good grief, I've even talked to the folks down there at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab about, we named Curiosity our official Professional Soil Scientists Association member of, she's up there wandering around sampling Mars. So,
interesting.
So
that's pretty cool.
And those are the kind of things that can connect with people too.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, catching them off guard by like, hey, we're looking at Mars soil. There's like, wait. Mars soil.
They're sampling. Yep.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. Well, like I said, those are all the questions I have. If you have any final comments you'd like to make, then you're more than free to.
Well, only just this. I am passionate about agriculture. I'm passionate about not just agriculture, but about the actual soils. Many times I've had eye-opening experiences, and I was the only one out there other than the soil. And so I'm talking to myself and that kind of thing. I mean, it's you can tell a soil's age even by smelling it. People would know that. I mean,
Wow.
there's all. I mean, you can get some ideas about it. What I'm saying is, and and so what we're all really trying to do is make sense out of what we're given here and in the soil, and so and to basically put it in a way that we can then explain it, educate it to others, and that's essentially what soil scientists do. It was a incredible experience for me. It still is. It still is. But that's kind of where I was coming from, and I was blessed to get into a vocation that I loved.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's really the ultimate goal too. Make a little money too, but get into something you really enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for coming in and doing this interview. I appreciate it. It was definitely interesting. I love getting people in here who are passionate about agriculture, who really have a strong stance on the industry. It's something we need more of, more people who are passionate and who want to vocalize their passion about that aspect of their lives. So, like I said, thanks again for everything. I'd like to thank our listeners for everything. Did you have something else you wanted to?
No, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
My pleasure. And so thank all you guys for checking it out. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.